Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lim-Camacho, and welcome to another Food System Horizons webinar. Today, we have the pleasure of having Max Fabula and Caroline Dean join us and share their knowledge and experience and talk about exploring food systems using Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing. As usual, we are recording this webinar and we'll record it up to the point of the end of the presentations, and then after that, we'll switch off at discussion time. If I can ask you to just please put yourself on mute if you're not presenting, that would be great to minimize any background noise. But hopefully, once we're on discussion time, we can go off mute and we can have a good chat. First of all, I'm Lily Lim-Camacho. If you haven't been with us before in this food system webinars, I work at CSIRO, and I am actually here to actually encourage food systems literacy and awareness of the different aspects of the food system. And this is why we run these webinars, is to show different angles of it, different perceptions, a different perspective from someone else's eyes. And so every time we have a webinar, we try to showcase a different angle of the food system. And today, we're really proud to have Max and Caroline share their perspectives of it. Max Fabula is a proud Tabir man and is an Indigenous researcher with a strong interest in addressing social and environmental issues from a creative perspective. You should see Max actually illustrated some of the work in the Indigenous Food Systems Insight chapter of the State of the Food System report. Max has experience in research, community engagement, and co-design with the Indigenous art, design, and creative industries, and has worked with several Indigenous communities around Australia. He's actually adapting these approaches to his current role at CSIRO, where he's working with Indigenous communities to bring Indigenous perspectives and science to drought resilience and food security research. Max has a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Sydney. You'll also hear from Caroline Dean, who is a proud Kamilaroi woman, completing her PhD at the University of Sydney's Posh Centre for Indigenous Research and the University Centre for Rural Health. She explores how food security is measured for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, aiming to develop a more culturally responsive measurement tool. I'm very interested in that. Caroline is passionate about achieving health equity for mob by addressing the social and cultural determinants of health, including access to healthy food. She holds a Bachelor of Nutrition and Dietetics at Monash University and a Master of Public Health Research at Monash University as well. And from here on, I'd like you to welcome Max and Caroline, and I'll hand over to Max to do an acknowledgement of country.
Thanks, Lily. I'll just open up some slides. Beginning. How's that? Can everyone see that?
Cool.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Lily, and also, yeah, welcome Caroline Dean, who's a colleague for a new project. So it's really exciting for us to kind of present some of our experiences together in this space. And this project's all about exploring the food system from, cultural ways, our ways, we have a lot of experience with the food system of the Australian continent. So it's all about, attacking food security from that angle. Just a warning that there are a few kind of references, images, and names of deceased persons in my presentation. Firstly, my name's Max. I'm on Gadigal country today in Sydney. These are some old photos of Gadigal country, and I've worked a lot with a Gadigal mob around here in my previous role. Just really highlight their kind of, concept and understanding of, they call it country under the concrete. And really trying to reconnect to, what country used to look like here in these, highly urbanized, gentrified, spaces. I really like to acknowledge that, this country looked different for a long time, and it was beautiful. There was, as you can see in these kind of pictures from this colonial artist when he first came over. I think he was a convict, Joe Lycett, but there's plenty of fishing going on. A highly active kind of food system at play. highly integrated into daily life, working with nature, whether it be salt water, whether it be in the forests around Sydney and Gadigal. So yeah, just like to acknowledge the Gadigal mob here and, their elders past and present, and yeah, invite others to kind of think about country from this way as well, wherever you may be, whether in a city, and encourage you to discuss what country you're on in the chat. Another part of the country I'm on is I'm sitting in an office down the road from Redfern, very, very important place in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history. Top left, there's a bit of a kind of land rights image of all the old rallies that continue on today. In the end, it's really important in this discussion around food systems to understand that, in Australia, we still don't have a treaty. I'm excited by what's happening in Victoria. But so it's, a different context to other settler colonial places for our mob around the world. This in the bottom left, there's a beautiful book done by Kevin Gilbert back in the day, who discusses, Aboriginal sovereignty, he was in the midst of this land rights movement, and he actually drafted a treaty like that, kind of from a nation state perspective. A lot of conversations about treaty and land rights and native title get talked about, but like actually having understanding what that looks like and kind of the power that, Aboriginal people want to have over their land and through that, their food system. I really encourage everyone to kind of look and read Kevin's treaty. He talks about, he quantifies, the amount of finance that we need, and its relation to, Aussie GDP and land resources and things like that. Very much connected to, the food systems of the future for our mob. And, treaty or not, we've still never ceded our sovereignty, and we still hold lots of knowledge and connection to our foods, and we try and practice that throughout our lives. And as you can see on the right, what this looks like is it's kind of complex with the fact that we don't have treaties. There's different types of, Indigenous rights, whether that be native title, whether that be, land rights, actually having, freehold title over some parts of the land. Some land is Indigenous managed, like different national parks around Australia. Some of it's co-managed. But you also see like the big gaps in, like, New South Wales, where a lot of the mobs around there, still fighting hard to get, any access to country, especially places like the Murray-Darling Basin, which I've spent some time working with the mobs there as well. But my name's Max. I'm a Jabba Jabba man. So my country is in Broome, about 2 hours north of Broome. And yeah, this is my food system really. I'm heading back there next week to again, spend a week and a half fishing and hunting with my elders and my community, because this is the social fabric of Aboriginal communities is through food. A lot of it. This on the left-hand side is, and Broome and the Kimberley is, massive tidal country. So the food system is changing, minute by minute, hour by hour, because of these massive, 10-meter tides that come in and out of our country. And, what that brings is such a diverse amount of food, nutritious food, tasty food, that, we're very proud of, and we, get a lot of agency from this type of food system. So on the left that's Winnewell Creek. So when the tide comes in, lots of big fish, lots of salmon, lots of lots of mackerel and things like that. You chuck a net in, you'll probably pull out like 10 different sizes and versions of fish. But there's on in the middle, that's a place called Mullabulaman. So that's a freshwater lake that fills up in the wet season. But I don't have too much knowledge about that, because that's, women's business. Freshwater is, kind of, that knowledge is held by women from my country. So just kind of, that's how, again, some of the traditional food system and how that works. To the right is again this kind of big mud flat. This is actually on Yaru Juukan country around Broome. But yeah, a lot of my cousins, the bottom right are a shellfish called cuckles or cockles, and these are highly nutritious foods that yeah, they just kind of like, when you're having a feed, when you're sitting by the fire, there's always kind of cuckles around because they're highly nutritious. They're like a superfood for us. And the way we collect it is, you go around, with your family, you're feeling for it in your toes. Like once, the big tides come out, and you kind of have, on sunset especially, you have like an hour to like kind of collect as much as you can before the mozzies hit you. So, but it's a very kind of community, valued species. And this actually disappeared for a long time off around Broome. There's different theories. No one really knows why, but there was, like a hovercraft tourism kind of business that was using the mudflats, and people have different theories around, that could potentially be, driving the cockles away, which had detrimental impacts to a traditional food. So just wanted to highlight that story. Again, another kind of perspective is, starting to situate, this kind of global or international or national, like kind of food security and food systems kind of scale. This is the scale that, kind of worked for our mob for 65,000 years, highly local, diverse, but highly interconnected, that spanned across the whole continent in different environments, lots of trading and sharing to kind of maintain this system. And what this facilitated was a sustainable, stable food system that was, highly optimized for Aboriginal health, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. And yeah, this has kind of all changed since settlement and invasion, but like the knowledge is still there, and the environment is still there, although it's being affected by different systems. This is the knowledge that that communities have, that spans across Australia, that we can really leverage in this space, and that's what Aboriginal communities and Torres Strait Islander communities really want. They want to get back to these local diverse food systems because it's just so good for our health. And another concept from my auntie, who always talks about the concept wang barang barang, and that's again this highly this kind of consciousness of interconnectedness. When we look at our environment, but when we look across our kinship systems, it's the same word as like a fishing net. So you can kind of see how this constant weaving is occurring. So, from a food systems perspectives, I always say, blackfellas are the first systems thinkers. So we need to really kind of engage with their knowledge to, best integrate these types of knowledges into our broader kind of food planning. Again, this is kind of moving towards the food security kind of aspect. Is, we have global definitions of food security. This is one that's highly used as, I think five or six dimensions that they focus on. But again, you can't just apply this to Australia because it's still not, it's still missing some key elements. There's still not an emphasis on culture. It still privileges like kind of Western-centric understandings of health and nutrition, which, and it's also human-centric. Our food system provided nutrition for all things, plants, animals, in this highly integrated system. We in our law, we talk about the rights of our more than human brothers and sisters. This is about people, and I don't know if I actually had a conversation with another great Indigenous researcher, Bo Cubillo, talks about, food security, even is that the right terminology in this space? Is it about food and nutrition security? Is it about, food systems, or is it about food sovereignty, which is, really where you want to get to as mob? This definition is kind of is a great definition as well to start framing and including these more cultural determinants, I guess. I mean, I love this definition because it prioritizes our cultural obligations first. Our cultural obligations of country, community, and preserving the knowledge of the 65,000 years of knowledge that was preserved and passing that on to our next generation. In the end, because also our culture is trained from this concept around healthy country, healthy community, healthy culture, healthy people, all the kind of health and nutrition benefits is built into the system because of these kind of these ethics of care almost that when we care for all the environment, that means we have resources, we have sustainable and stable resources that are beneficial for us. The way we prepare our food from a cultural way is also like optimizes the nutrients. We eat lots of fresh food. There's no kind of bigger supply chains that and we maintain our soil health and all these things that are built into the system. And we already know, we know from our yarns of our aunties and uncles that, we were so healthy before 1788. You can even read early colonial accounts in Sydney, which talk about, I think the life expectancy back then was about 40 for, Europeans. And, there was clear stories of, us, living, past 60 and, a lot older than that, So when we also about that kind of paradigm shift as well, which Jacob Birch, another Gamilaroi researcher who I'd like to highlight, he did some work he did his Churchill Fellowship exploring traditional food systems in Native America, and he said that one of the key findings, he spoke to a mob called the Fond du Lac band, and they, since returning to their traditional food systems, they've managed to increase their life expectancy to above the US average. When we think about closing the gap, I'm thinking about closing the gap to what, our people experienced from a health perspective before colonization. I don't want to compare us to, the non-Indigenous life expectancy, which is still, driven by Western European foods. So yeah, I just love talking about these paradigm shifts and how we can start framing the conversation. And yeah, just to highlight Jacob's work, he's doing his PhD around food sovereignty as a key to like Aboriginal nation building. And so he always, I just want to make the point that the success of this, this outcome is because they had ownership over their food. They didn't treat food as a commodity. They managed their lands not from Western conservation principles, but for the purpose of managing their food system, which created all this sense of agency and things like that. And it took a long time, but this is the benefits of self-determination. And yeah, it all kind of integrates into the system when Aboriginal people are empowered to do the work themselves. So, and this, yeah, another inspiring researcher as well, Indigenous researcher, is Anne Polina, and she again talks about Indigenous knowledge as a gift if treated with respect, with correct ICRP. But we have a knowledge and a legal system that can frame different solutions to things like climate change, things like reduced biodiversity, food security, all these kind of lessons from that Indigenous knowledge gives around our local food and the interconnected systems. Yeah, just wanted to touch. I'm just giving a shout out to a bunch of Indigenous researchers that inspire me because, again, I'm still quite young and new to this space. And yeah, kind of moving towards the project that I've been on this journey within CSIRO, and I just wanted to highlight all those concepts because that's what it's so important to understand when we start. If we want to start talking about Indigenous food security or food systems, it's so important to understand these concepts because they're a lot different And when you plug these into a system or a policy, things change. Let me just have a sip of water. Well, yeah, in my role at CSIRO, I am in the nutrition and equity team, so holding up the flag for nutrition in ag and food in CSIRO, which is a really great space to be in, and because Indigenous people, my people have so much experience with a nutrient dense kind of diet, and it's a really fun and kind of place to be in. But again, myself and the team, so shout out to Sinead, Anayat, Deanna, and Emma, who's also been on this journey with me in this past kind of year or so, and also connecting to this Food Systems Horizons collective as well. I've just kind of been on this journey exploring just some research methodologies and some experiences and understanding the policy around Indigenous food security. We've also, spent some time yarning to a lot of, Indigenous orgs such as the Punapima and who have calls to action and things like that that are really important in framing these framing and driving food security initiatives. And just kind of socializing different ideas. We had a small piece of funding, so we decided to, undertake some desktop work, a desktop analysis, and really, understanding these kind of broad research questions. For example, the first one, what are the drivers of Indigenous food security? We already know that, from that Indigenous food security definition, we prioritize our Indigenous foods, but we also understand that, the importance of healthy Western foods as well. And when you consider that system, it's complex. There's European, it's about agriculture, infrastructure, supply chains, food processing. It's highly industrialized. It needs coordination, and then so there's that system. And then when you place on top of that system a whole new set of foods from country, and that requires care and management and coordination, it gets very complex as well. Kind of started from there, understanding those key drivers, and then again, how can we begin to understand and recognize or even describe these complex array of factors that are influencing this system? We decided to use system science methods, connecting with the Food Systems Horizons initiative, connecting with Anayat, who's our systems expert. He has lots of technical skills around qualitative systems dynamics modeling, all these kind of complex features. But what it does is it allows us to view systems that overcome silos. It's a non-linear approach. You can look across various different kind of policy sectors and understand how they're interacting with each other, and then what that means for actual action and moving towards initiatives. And system science also allows us to play with embedding Indigenous values and determinants and plugging it into a system and seeing how that interacts with the broader system. So it's been useful in that sense. So, for example, the scope of the work was around Queensland, and we kind of just selected 20 documents that all represented like different mainstream policy actors like water, agriculture, fisheries. But, how do we, represent those Indigenous cultural values as well? Well, there's a whole new set of policy actors that you need to include: ATCHOs, Indigenous land and sea managers, PBCs, native title groups, all these things that we wanted to also, highlight the actions and highlight and legitimate them as, key policy actors. And this also occurs from a regional level with the ATCHOs, but it can also, in the Cape York, it's quite interesting because it has, local councils and PBCs and the Great Barrier Reef with the traditional use marine resources agreements and the sea country ranges. So we just wanted to see, how the systems dynamics are working. And this is my little shell diagram that I drew. But I think Lily saw a croissant in it. So yeah, it's up to your imagination. But yeah, this is kind of, the building blocks to our research framework was starting from, those core values, those Indigenous definitions of food security, and, also highlighting, this kind of interconnected system that, means, healthy country, healthy culture, and healthy community as this circular notion that is so important in any kind of research. And then, when you look at those dimensions of food security, how does, those definitions change those dimensions? Obviously, there's the ones from the HLP around stability, sustainability, etc. But, what I really wanted to highlight was, access and availability of non-Indigenous foods compared to Indigenous foods needs to be differentiated. It's so important because, if you increase the supply of, agriculturally produced foods, that might decrease the supply of Indigenous foods. So it's just so important to highlight those as separate dimensions. Otherwise, things can get aggregated and you can lose some of the key messages. Again, from those dimensions, we see, the range of policy actors that kind of influence the system. As you see, there's lots of Western ones, and there's lots of Indigenous-led ones. So from there, we kind of looked at all the actions that they were saying in these policies, and there was so much actions, as you know, in policy. So what we took a strengths-based approach, and we highlighted some of these shared values that they're all kind of driving towards. And from there, we kind of used a strengths-based approach to highlight all the actions and how they relate to different some of these values, and then we can get a viewpoint of the system where you can start to see how people are interacting with one another. I'm not going to spend too much on this slide, but this is the simplified versions of the system, and pretty much each kind of factor within each kind of theme, that's actually made up of that could be made up of 6 different actions from across the different policy sectors that are all kind of talking about the same thing, but we just want to show how everyone's kind of interacting and where there might be opportunities for collective action, and things like that. I'll just do a quick deep dive into 2 of them, just to explain. And this is foundational, I think, to this. If we're going to start this conversation of ingraining or embedding Indigenous perspectives and knowledge into our food system, food security research, respecting Indigenous values. So, because we looked at ATROs and Aboriginal councils and land councils and stuff like that, there's all these actions related to food that, focus around strengthening our access to country and our cultural identities and things like that. But I also want to highlight that, in policies such as the water policy, the fisheries policy, the Great Barrier Reef policy, NRM policies, they also are highlighting this importance to embed Indigenous knowledge and values into, their work. So, as you can see, everything, this is a very positive one where everything kind of from self-determination and investment in caring for country, it creates really good kind of, potential patterns of interactions that all kind of reproduce and enhance one another. I think one of the biggest things that we saw is that loop 2, sustained investment in culture. I still think the funding has to back it up. And this is where, some policymakers might see, they might struggle to understand where they fit in this kind of self-determination movement, but you definitely need to fit in there because, things like, handing back land rights, agricultural land, improving access to country, improving water entitlements, for example, is so important to food security. And these are all driven by government policies. So I think it's just really important to kind of not see this as something that it's just Indigenous led, that Indigenous leadership is driving all this, but it's also understanding that you still have a role to play in these types of actions. And you can't just leave it up to us because, we have so many issues that we're trying to, systemic issues that we're trying to challenge that we need some support to get back to our culture, and then we can be food secure that way. Another kind of good example of the trade-offs is this kind of understanding of resilience, and going back to that point around, there's lots of talk about resilience in policy, but resilience for who? You have to ask the question for, because again, if you look at loop one, you might have, new innovative ways of agricultural production, which might intensify food production because maybe it's net zero and it's regenerative and things like that. But is that just, and then that might be exported, overseas where communities are still missing out. It might be putting stress on local ecosystems that Indigenous people rely on for access to country and traditional foods. So yeah, it's just, we need to be careful about how we frame different policies. We need to think from a systems perspective so we don't run into these kind of reproducing problems. Even supply chain resilience, it may strengthen food supply, but reduce community wellbeing if there's no need for employment from a local perspective. If, the supply chains are so techified and so efficient, then, are we just, again, promoting, more, regional centres that, hold lots of resources and then communities on the ground are missing out. So those are just a couple of examples. And I'll finish up because I want to really hear from Caroline as well. But in the end, this was like a short project, but I'm really passionate about this space. I know there's a bunch of other Indigenous researchers that are, heavily involved. Josh Gilbert has a great book about, our First Nations agricultural identity. There's a great, I think the Farm Policy Journal has a really good piece on called Yini Mara, and it's all about First Nations voices in ag. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of, great strategies and talk from, the national strategy of remote food security, the gather and grow, and also this food security strategy that's been talked about. So yeah, really keen to kind of connect with people in the room, and if you have any questions about the project and how we might be able to collaborate, it's great. But yeah, starting to pass on to Caroline. The work I've promoted is a very high level, and it's really, focused the audiences on policymakers and how we can start thinking from a different perspective. This is all needs to be driven from the ground up, grassroots approach, because all the unique nuances of each community, all the different pressures on ecosystems and knowledge is all very locally specific. So yeah, I'll stop there and pass on to Caroline to talk about some of that. Thank you. Sorry, I'll stop sharing. How'd I go for time? But did I leave enough time for everyone?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Max. That's such a really wonderful and comprehensive presentation. Just going to see if I can share. Oops. When you see that, can you just see the slide?
Yeah.
Max? Okay, cool. Well. Sorry, just checking. All right. Yeah, so I'd just like to start by thanking Max for sharing his insights on Indigenous food systems. It was really comprehensive and such a great strength-based overview. And just echo that food for us is more than just eating for Indigenous peoples. Food carries nutritional, healing, spiritual, social, cultural, relational and emotional dimensions and values, which Max really highlighted. It's an expression of our connection to each other, our lands, our waters, and our non-human relatives in the spiritual world. So yeah, there really is a need to support the continuation of Indigenous people's food practices. So I'm a Gamilaroi woman. I'm from Moree in New South Wales, and I grew up on Victoria. And these are some pictures from my journey into, I guess, food systems as a wide-eyed, fresh public health nutritionist. and some of the different experiences that I've had working both overseas in nutrition policy and research roles, and also in different remote communities as a nutritionist or a dietitian in the Northern Territory and in Cape York as well. The last 3 years of which was spent working on a research project that aimed to develop a community-led framework of solutions to improve food security. And Lily will share the link to this research project. That was a partnership with University of Queensland, Apuna Pima, and Congress in Central Australia. So I encourage you to check it out because there's some really great resources there that you can see our publications, and there's some videos from community members where they share their challenges and ideas for solutions to improve food security. So yeah, I'll admit when I went first to work in remote communities, it was in Central Australia, traveling by car to 5 different remote communities. And I was shocked at the poverty and the high rates of chronic disease and the barriers that people face to eating, to consuming a healthy diet. And the fact that this was normalized and accepted both by the community, but by other service providers. And to me, this highlights the importance of taking a food systems approach, that despite the continuation of our cultural practices, these extremely high rates of chronic disease and food insecurity, it's not an individual problem, but a system failure. Okay. So on this map, I'm just highlighting some of the places that I was lucky enough to work. So in Central Australia, East Arnhem Land at the top end of Northern Territory, and Cape York in far north Queensland. And I'd just like to share some reflections from Max's presentation, drawing from my experience working in these places. So Max's insights strongly resonate with what I've seen, particularly the diversity across communities and access to traditional foods, health services, housing, education, and leadership opportunities. And this reinforces that need for that place-based approach. No 2 communities are the same, and their challenges are not either. For example, in Cape York, some communities have easy access to traditional foods. People simply walk down to the river and throw a line in and fish. In contrast, in Central Australia, accessing bush foods often required a working vehicle, fuel for the vehicle, a gun license, you needed the bullets as well, and it needed quite a significant amount of time. So people have described driving all day, really far out and returning sometimes empty-handed, not able to actually, not have a successful hunting trip that time. And they're often relying on those borrowed resources like the vehicle and the money for fuel. So there is a strong desire, as Max also highlighted, within communities to increase access to traditional foods and maintain our cultural practices. And native food enterprises offer a real opportunity, but they do need that government support to thrive while still preserving our self-determination. And one powerful example of this is in East Arnhem Land, where a traditional food business is owned and operated by an Aboriginal corporation. So their goal is to create economic opportunities that allow people to remain on country connected to their songlines. The fish and bush foods that they harvest are sold locally to schools, aged care centres and stores, and also sent to Darwin as well. The fishermen receive training from the NT fisheries to meet the licensing and transport requirements. And so this offers a model of community-led innovation that supports health, culture, and economy. With the right support, it can be replicated across other areas in Australia. So in our communities, sharing is more than a value, it's a way of life. We share food, money, electricity, and care. And this collective approach promotes equity, even in the face of food insecurity and poverty. Our food systems, as Max described, are local, and where there is ownership of land or stores or even health services, it's shared. Our governance is collective. Being food secure means being able to provide for others, and there is pride in that. This generosity reflects our strength and our resilience. It's also seen in how we care for country, with deep understanding that our well-being is tied to each other and to the land. There is wisdom here, as Max said. This is a model of equity and sustainability that all Australians can learn from. So I'll now briefly share with you a collaborative research project that Max and I are leading. It adopts systems thinking to develop culturally appropriate indicators of food security for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So this project forms part of my PhD and brings together different grants, including the CSIRO Indigenous Research Grant, which actually holds the bulk of our funding. So food security definitions and assessment frameworks used in research and policy, as Max pointed out, are largely shaped by capitalist and colonial values. These dominant approaches often fail to recognise Indigenous knowledge systems and the cultural practices that have long supported food security in our community. The ability to define food security and decide how it should be achieved shapes the collective action to address it and determines who will benefit from food security related initiatives. So this research seeks to address that gap. Our aim is to ensure Indigenous knowledge systems are not only reflected, but also respected and privileged in the development of a culturally responsive, trauma-informed tool. This tool will measure experiences of food security for Indigenous people across Australia, including urban, regional, and remote communities. Importantly, it will be comprehensive. It won't just assess whether households have access to adequate nutritious food. It will also capture those broader determinants of food security, recognising the complex social, cultural, and environmental factors that shape these experiences. So this project is proudly Indigenous-led, privileging Indigenous ways of knowing, being and doing at every stage of the research process. So we've partnered with GBK, Land and Sea Council in the Torres Strait Islands, and Bundjalung Tribal Society in Lismore. These two communities face distinct food security challenges also driven by climate change, including rising sea levels in the Torres Strait Islands and flooding in Lismore. These voices have been largely absent from food security literature, and so this research, just sought these sites to partner with, and they also had an interest in food security and addressing it. So together we've established Indigenous project advisory groups in each site, and these groups will guide the research from start to finish, shaping how we collect data, how we analyse it, and how we translate findings into action. All outcomes will be shared with our partners, ensuring the research remains accountable, transparent, and grounded in community priorities. We're also conducting a comprehensive scoping review that explores the determinants of food security for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So screening and the qualitative analysis is being conducted by 3 Indigenous researchers, including Max and myself. We included papers that specifically focused on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and captured their experiences or perspectives on any aspect of food security. In total, 39 peer-reviewed and graded literature articles were included, along with 61 submissions from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations to the 5 recent government inquiries into food security. So that included the state and national inquiries into food security. All articles and submissions are now being inductively coded using NVivo. And so this approach ensures that the analysis is grounded in Indigenous ways of knowing and reflects community priorities and lived experiences. And some early insights from our review highlight the importance of taking a holistic perspective of food security that centres Indigenous knowledges and recognises Indigenous people's deep and continuing connection to country. The submissions and research articles call for increased agency and control over the food system, including both Western and traditional foods, and a need for place-based and community-driven solutions. The results of the scoping review will be mapped against those 6 dimensions that Max mentioned, describing what each of these means for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The determinants will also be mapped using Sticky, a visual program that will show the relationship between the different determinants, highlighting key areas for action that could be used to inform indicators for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander food security. So in the next phase, we're building on the literature review to identify the determinants of food security for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples through community-led systems thinking. So we're going to apply group model building, which is a participatory system science method that helps communities map the system level drivers of complex issues and co-design solutions. So as Max pointed out, Indigenous people are natural systems thinkers, so it aligns with those Indigenous research principles and has been successfully used with Indigenous communities in Victoria. Each site will host 2 workshops with diverse participants and the Indigenous Project Advisory Group to co-create this visual system map. A 3rd workshop will invite the broader community to review the map, identify priority actions, and distinguish between solutions that communities can lead and those requiring government support. And this will inform future advocacy and policy. Our final goal is to develop indicators of food security for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We'll hold an in-person workshop with the Indigenous Project Advisory Group from both sites to co-design these indicators using insights from the system maps we've created during the previous workshops. So this will be a collaborative, iterative process with indicators prioritised by the Project Advisory Group to keep the future survey concise and relevant. These indicators will form the foundation of an Indigenous household food security measurement tool, which will be grounded in community knowledge and designed to support meaningful action. So this research is both timely and urgent. As national and state governments move to develop food security strategies, it's critical that Indigenous-led solutions are at the centre, not on the sidelines. Our work will deliver culturally grounded indicators designed by and for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to evaluate food security initiatives with rigour. These tools will empower communities, inform policy, and strengthen both government and Indigenous-led efforts to build a healthier, more equitable and sustainable Australia. I'll now hand over to Max to help with coordinating questions.
Yeah. I'll just, thanks. Sorry, Lily, I'll just quickly jump in. Yeah, thanks so much, Caroline. Such powerful insights. And like Caroline has done so much work at the community level that needs to be highlighted in difficult, complex, contexts. So it's so important that Caroline continues to share that journey. And in saying that, before we if there's any questions in the chat, I'd really encourage any Indigenous voices in the room firstly to if they want to share any insights or any comments or have any questions for the team. But just want to open it up first before handing back to Lily.
I might just stop recording, Max, just to let people know. And but let's open the floor.
You got a question?